name's Wendy Warrington. I'm one of the presenters of the training today, and I'm also assisted by my colleague who will also be presenting, Sarah Radford. So she's managing the chat function as we speak. So can you just please introduce yourselves, or just in the chat function, and then we'll make a start. We're just we thought we had a couple more people that were due to come on, but I think we need to make a start, really.
Can you ask people to let me know if they're putting anything in the chat function, because I can't see it. Oh, hang on.
Hi, Sarah. So what we're going to do is this is our first lunch and learn session that Sarah and I have presented, and what we're going to do today, because it's Adult Safeguarding Week, that we are doing the 1 hour lunch and learn on adult grooming. Please remember that this is our first time presenting this, and we are quite excited about presenting to you today, and we would really appreciate your feedback at the end. We are going to be doing a question and answer session when we've completed, so we'll make time for that. There is also a briefing paper to accompany the presentation, so we will also make sure that you have a copy of that and the PowerPoint presentation, and there is an awful lot of links as well at the end, so that you can do further reading. So with that, I think we'll make a start. Please feel free, there's only a few of us on the session today, so you can, if there's something that's really like burning any question, if you can't wait to the end, please either write it in the chat or put your hand up and Sarah will pick it up. Okay, so you're all here for the right session. We're doing about adult grooming. Adults can be groomed also for abuse. Grooming is mostly associated with the abuse of children, but adults, as I say, can also be groomed. So, definition of adult grooming is a form of abuse that involves manipulating someone until they are isolated, dependent, and more vulnerable to exploitation. Grooming is predatory act of manoeuvring another individual into a position that makes them more isolated and dependent, more likely to trust. The more vulnerable to abusive behaviour. The goal is to prepare the other person for the abuse, for example, sexual abuse or financial abuse, at a later time. The first steps the groomer takes is to establish friendship and trust, and that's the start of the process. Adult grooming is correspondent to child grooming and applies to any situation where an adult is primed to allow him or herself to be exploited or abused. It can happen online and in everyday life. But what we also need to remember that in terms of this, that not everybody who is groomed is actually vulnerable. But we're going to talk about that as we go further into the presentation. And while it is not identified as one of the forms of adult abuse under the Care Act of 2014, it is something that often results in abuse that is, you might have heard these terms: trafficking, modern day slavery, sexual abuse, financial abuse, physical abuse, and murder or radicalisation. So what is adult grooming? Well, most people think about grooming, they think about children, but as I've said, adults are vulnerable to grooming too. We're going to explore the issues of adult grooming, including the signs of grooming that you should look out for. What we need to remember is that this is a gradual process, and the abuser picks their target and builds up trust initially before the actual abuse begins. There are many reasons why someone might groom an adult at risk. And as I say, it could result in financial abuse. The groomer's motivation is clear, that it's for financial or material gain. Many cases of grooming lead to sexual abuse. Again, in these instances, it's clear to see what the groomer's getting out of the arrangement. Grooming can also result in radicalisation. in which case the groomer is simply working to win someone over to their cause. But in some cases, grooming might be difficult to identify as a motive. Unfortunately, some people just enjoy having the power over others, and like narcissists. So you moved it on to the next one, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
So why does adult grooming happen? It often starts with friendship. The groomer will look for ways to gain their target's trust, often with gifts or promises, which can be referred to the term as love bombing. Eventually, they'll start to ask for something in return, and this eventually leads to abuse. And what we need to be mindful of, that this process, as with radicalisation, can take not weeks, not months, it can take actually years for it to be fully sort of under the influence of the groomer. Because groomers work to befriend their victims, some organisations refer to it as mate crime. You might have heard that term, hate mate crime. Grooming can happen in person, or it can happen online. And online grooming, you might have heard of the term catfishing, and we're going to just talk a little bit about that a little bit further on. But this is where the groomer pretends to be someone they're not in order to gain their trust. And again, when we're talking about exploitation in terms of children, where you've got adults who are pretending to be a child of a similar age. Well, in this instance, again with the groomer, they might post a picture of themselves. Well, allegedly it's supposed to be of themselves, but they'd be using a fake profile or a fake photograph. So there are many reasons why someone might groom an adult at risk. And again, it could be for personal gain, for exploitation, but also it's about power and control and coercion. So what are the signs of grooming? Some of the signs of grooming that you should look out for: the person may become withdrawn, or they may seem troubled by something, but they'll be unwilling to talk about it. Alternatively, their emotions might become more volatile, so the moods might be changing. You might notice subtle changes about them, something that they're wearing, something new, something that they've not bought for themselves. Groomers also often aim to isolate the targets from the family or friends. So you might notice that they're reluctant or refuse a visit. And this might all be down to the groomer's manipulation of them. And you may also notice as well that in terms of, it could be a relative, that sums of money are disappearing from the bank accounts, or they've not got enough money to pay for their household outgoings, the bills, or for food. And you might notice that they're spending unusually a lot more time either on the phone or online, but they won't say who they're speaking to or who they're talking to. So in terms of the grooming process, a person will identify and engage a victim and work to gain the target's trust. So in terms of like breaking down the defences and manipulate the victim until they get whatever it is that they're after. So that can be like over attention, verbal seduction, flattery, ego stroking, recruitment, physical isolation, being charming, giving gifts, normalising. You've heard the term gaslighting. This is where they might move things around, and the person thinks that what I've done with this, and then they try to sort of like put the blame onto that person, where the actual victim feels that they're like losing like sort of control, that things aren't right. The secrecy, these are all threats, and threats are all hallmarks of grooming. The problem is that victims of grooming don't often feel like they need help. Also, in some instances of grooming, they have all the appearance of an authentic romance or relationship until it's so far down the line. So in terms of the victim, as far as they're concerned, this is a loving relationship. It's because the abuser, the groomer, cares about them, and they don't see that what they're doing in terms of trying to isolate from family and friends, or that they are actually being groomed. So groomers target and manipulate vulnerable people for exploitation. Grooming has escalated worldwide thanks to the internet, because it's so easy for predators to create false profiles, and which we hear about. Currently, there are more than 500,000 predators online every day worldwide, and this seems to be a real popular form of grooming, and we hear it in the press, don't we, in terms of people who are potentially who are working, who've got who are supported by family and friends, but then they get targeted and end up sending vast amounts of money and losing significant amount of money, and sending to foreign countries, or to support the groomer's family or relative, or whatever that they come up with at that time. So it's just something that we really need to be aware of, because the groomer takes pleasure in skillfully causing pain to increase his sense of control, and in keeping the victim anxiously focused, so that they are not not upsetting or angering them. So in terms of that, it can be like, well, why won't you send me that money? Don't you care about me? And as I say, the manipulation it can be very, very subtle, and it takes time, and we need to be aware that this is quite a slow and ongoing process, but it can happen to anybody. So catfishing is defined as luring someone into a relationship by adopting a fictional online persona. And there are two types of catfishing. A person is pretending to be me. The person stole your photos and or identity and uses this trick to trick other people. So for example, you discover someone entered your details on an adult website to entice prospective clients. When the client starts calling you, the person illegally publishes your information, sensitive details like your home address on the site, which puts you at further risk of predators. The person can be prosecuted for impersonation and jailed. If this happens to you, you need to contact the site immediately to say that you were catfished. They will close the catfish down. You have been catfished if you believe you were speaking to a person when in fact you were speaking to someone else entirely. For example, a lady who is lonely enters her details into a dating website. She is catfished by a person who created a false profile and who pretends to match her. And again, that's something that we do hear about. So how do we spot a catfish? So a person who refuses to do FaceTime chats or voice chats, a person whose story changes as time goes by, a person's story who sounds too good to be true, it usually is, a person who tells you they want to meet up, set up a meeting and then cancels at the last moment. In terms of kind of a person being criminally charged for online grooming and extortion, it depends on the acts of cyberbullying. The perpetrator may be criminally charged with offences, but it's really, really difficult to actually prove sometimes. But also the fact that it goes massively unreported, because people, and Sarah's going to talk about that, is that people feel a great amount of shame and embarrassment and the fact that they have been a victim, so to speak. So it is vastly unreported. So we're just going to swap now, and Sarah's going to pick up the next part of the session.
Hello everybody. So I'm just going to expand a little more on what Wendy was talking about there about who are the victims of grooming. It can be that anybody can be a victim of a groomer. I mean, there's particular risk perhaps for people who are already quite isolated or lonely, who have low self-esteem, who have what they call soft boundaries, or any cognitive mental impairment that affects judgment. But it is important to remember that there's going to be times in everyone's life when they're more vulnerable than at other times. So we need to be really open-minded about who could be at risk, because it could be anybody. And in terms of this phenomenon, it is very misunderstood, and I think there's not a lot known about it. And just to sort of quote a psychologist who's done a lot of work into researching sexual abuse as a result of grooming adults, Cinnamon has said that the misunderstanding around grooming of adults is often brought about by victim blaming, humiliation, stigmatization, a reluctance to report, and the legal, social and emotional weight brought against victims by the institutions in which adult sexual abuse often takes place. And I suppose that's something probably we can all understand a little bit by high profile cases that we hear about happening in big organisations, potentially. So people don't often want to, they don't feel like they'll be believed, or they don't want to be thought of as a victim, which can be really difficult. So Cinnamon came up with 7 stages of adult grooming in relation to sexual abuse, but really reading around this subject, this is a very general framework that any kind of grooming really could apply to. So first, they select the victim. Secondly, gather information, and this is with the goal of making that personal connection. Fourthly, it's about meeting the needs and establishing credentials. Fifthly, it's priming the target. Sixthly, creating the victim by instigating sexual contact. And 7, it's controlling the victim. So that's generally what he was thinking. So in terms of, bear with me a second, sorry, I've just lost my piece of paper. So sorry about that. So how does an offender go about grooming another person? So there's 3 primary goals a groomer focuses on to control the environment of a victim. Affiliation is where they gain the access to the potential adult victims, and predators are masters at positioning themselves in proximity to a possible victim. So they join groups, they might take on a particular profession, or as Wendy said, meet potential victims online via dating sites or gaming platforms, for example. Second, acceptance. So the next step is to manipulate the perceptions, not only of the person who's the victim, but other people around them. So it's to gain that social acceptance within the group. And this is important, that they are seen as a good match or a good friend for that person. This acceptance lessens the risks of difficult questions being asked by the group. And in time, it sort of works against the victim, because that abuser then has credibility within the group. And it might be that the victim then withdraws from the group in an acceptable way, so it further isolates them. And this is where gaslighting comes in as well. So the power and the charm of these predators sometimes is really powerful and quite scary. So they're quite adept at being con artists. Thirdly, there's assurance. They seek to ensure ongoing access to the victim and that the group and environment perceives them as harmless, and this is how they get to maintain their control. So what do we do if we suspect that grooming is happening? As we've already said, for all the reasons previously mentioned, it can be really hard to know that this is happening, and quite often people that it's happening to directly don't really know that it's happening. So it can be hard for others outside, particularly if they've been taken in and charmed by that predatory person. But I think what's important is to have those conversations with people, and it depends very much on what your relationship is with that person, if it's someone in your personal life, if it's someone you know professionally, what their sort of level of communication is and what their understanding of relationships can be. If somebody's very much not wanting to hear that somebody is not a good friend, or you don't think they're a good partner for them, then that can be it can be really difficult. So it's about sort of having that conversation and keeping questions very open and trying to find out what's happening and finding out what it is they want. Consider if the adult would benefit from a referral to adult safeguarding. This would enable a multi-agency approach to sharing information and determining facts, because it can be, like we say, it can be really hard, particularly if you're working with someone, perhaps you only know a small amount of what's going on in a situation, and perhaps, you know, in that multi-agency forum, you might then find out more information. If risks are related to radicalisation and you're concerned about somebody potentially being suddenly taking on, you know, new ideology that's connected to a group of friends or a person, then it might be about making a referral to prevent. If it's domestic abuse that you're concerned about, then a completion of a DASH and referral to MARAC or other specialist services may be required. I think it's really difficult from what I've read around in terms of the law, because quite often adult grooming per se is not covered by law, but in terms of coercion and control in domestic relationships, you know, that's now covered in law. I've read somewhere that people in an autism charity are encouraging people that they're coming across who are victims of mate crime to report it to police as disability hate crime, which was something I hadn't really thought of before. But it's, you know, it's an interesting thought, and it's important that we recognise that these are really harmful relationships, and some of the worst case scenarios is that people have been really seriously injured. And so we can inform the police if we're concerned about that. In Greater Manchester, GMP have some really excellent resources. If you put into, I think it's in the resource section at the end of the briefing, but if you look at the trapped resource part of GMP/Challenger, I think it is, it's part of the Challenger campaign. This is very much about focusing on not only young people and things like county lines, but, you know, adults as well, who are very often being exploited, who are being perhaps groomed and then sort of forced into criminal activity, maybe having people organised criminals taking over their homes, storing guns and drugs and different things in their property, hurting people. Sex workers as well are often, there's a section on that website there about helping them, because quite often people are the way that they're choosing their victims sometimes is because they think that they're people who will never seek help or report crime. So that's there's lots of resources there for members of the public and also for professionals. So I'd recommend that. But there's other things here too. So MenCap have some good resources. They've got a helpline. The Anne Craft Trust also have a lot of information about adult grooming and how to go about getting help and advice. So if you have further questions, you can contact us in the Central Safeguarding Team, but there's all these other organisations as well who are really, really helpful. Thank you. I think that brings us to the end. Are there any questions? Is there anyone in the chat? Or do people want to put on them, unmute themselves and ask a question or say something about maybe something you've come across yourself in your practice? No. Oh, great. I can see. Yeah. Oh, there's chat at the bottom. I can see the chat. Oh, great.
Any questions?
No, Sarah McHale was saying that it was clear and comprehensive and nice to have the links too. That's great. Thank you very much. I'll put my mask on now. I'm not speaking at length.
Look at the presentation and
the briefing. Yeah. So yeah, we'll be sending out the briefing to everyone who's attended today, and I think this will be this recording will be available on the intranet on our page. No? Okay. Well, thanks very much for coming along today. Shall we end there?